go on to the third story. And
eventually you loop back around if you're lucky.
He never did.
Well, yes.
My grandfather never did.
So yes, for those of you that just joined in the live stream, we're talking about how much digression there is in this particular Mishnah. Now, we call it digression because we are well-trained, modern Western European, linear thinking. It's, you know, the system of science that has made medicine what it is and put people on the moon. It has a lot to go for it, but that is not the way the Mishnah was organized, and there's a reason why it wasn't organized that way. And it's because this is technically believed to be easier to remember, because it's easier to remember a chain of ideas than it is to remember just a distinct linear law code. And that's why for much of our history, there were many people who had memorized, not just whole sections of Mishnah, but sometimes the entire Mishnah. And it was easy to flow from one topic to the other, which feels like a digression. And certainly in the Talmud, the topics branch even further. Ideally, we loop back around, or as is more often the case, it's felt, I've already said what you needed to hear, and I don't need to bring you back to the beginning because you should have figured it out by this point. And that's also a very Jewish technique, is I don't need to state the obvious. Is that Penelope telling me it's not working? That is, I don't know. No. That just, so that is a very Jewish thing indeed, to have, that reminds me, that reminds me, that reminds me. It's how we link thoughts so that it's easier to remember them. But yes, some of us don't always remember where we started, and that's why we write them down a little bit. Okay. Again, as always, it's meant to be reminded, although we say the Mishnah is the oral law, it is really the springboard to the oral law. It is meant to be the cliff notes, and you are supposed to study it and remember more than what's on the page. That's what makes it a useful study guide, as opposed to the comprehensive, exhaustive, else what's on the page. That was never the plan. This was a way that you could remember the nuggets, and then you could break them open into all of their pieces and get all the extra detail out of it. With that in mind, we are still continuing with but also that reminds me of things that need to be done at certain times. And so we're in chapter 2, Mishnah 6, and I need a reading volunteer. Someone I can interrupt.
All right, I'll read.
All right, Judy, thank you.
Where do I start with? It says Mishnah 6?
Yep, the whole.
The whole night is valid for reaping the omer and for burning fat and limbs on the altar.
All right, so these are mitzvot that need to be done in the night. These mitzvot could be done anytime during the night. And now we're going to get the klal, we're going to get the general rule as a summary in part 2.
This is the general principle. Any matter whose commandment is during the day is valid all day, and any matter whose commandment is at night is valid all night.
All right, so we got a lot of examples, but now the rabbis are giving us a summary so that we can apply it to other places. Now, this may remind you, if you've ever done any other Mishnah or Talmud study, of the very beginning of Masechet Brachot. What time do we do the Shema at nighttime? And has anybody here read or studied that? Yes? Right. No problem, right? So the start is, of course, night, right? Seit Kochavim, when the stars come out. That's the beginning of the nighttime Shema window of opportunity. The end gets a little debate, and they settle on the idea of it should be before midnight. But if pressed and honest, any time before night is over is technically valid. Right? They set up the midnight as a barrier so that people don't accidentally forget, fall asleep, and wake up, the next day and missed the opportunity. And that's a reminder here, is that yes, technically the mitzvah can be done anytime during the night because it's the nighttime Shema. And as we just saw, the general rule is if it can be done at night, it can be done anytime during the night. But the rabbis instituted a precautionary point of saying it needs to be done by midnight, so that way we don't accidentally forget it. And as this is the kind of thing that we do all the time, as opposed to some of these special events, that's the kind of thing that could easily be forgotten or overlooked. Make sense?
So when you wake up in the morning, I don't know it in Hebrew, but I just say, "Thank you, Lord, for giving me back my soul."
Modeh ani, yes.
Yeah. So I was going to get that from you.
That actually is not a mitzvah. It's not a commandment. So the custom is to say that as soon as we wake up, as soon as we realize we are awake. That is the sort of standard custom. But any time really is fine in the morning. But because it's not a mitzvah, it doesn't have a specific law of saying it must be done at this point.
What about the Shema in the morning then?
The Shema in the morning does need to be done in the first few hours, yes. Okay. Now, we're in the chapter 3, Mishnah 1. And which may not seem like it's connected to the Megillah reading at all, but in we go.
Okay, Mishnah 1.
Let me put that on silence just in case. Because I don't think...
I like this stuff.
No, that's a platypus.
Okay. A real platypus?
It's actually Perry the platypus from the TV show Phineas and Ferb. Pretty close to what a real platypus sounds like.
Oh, okay.
And I never knew that. And I think it's pretty cool.
That is cool. Mishnah 1. Townspeople who sold the town square, they may buy with the proceeds a synagogue. If they sold a synagogue, they may buy with the proceeds an ark. If they sold an ark, they may buy covers for scrolls.
Meaning for the Torah.
If they sold covers, they may buy scrolls of the Tanakh.
I remember back then, not everybody had a copy of the Chumash or the Tanakh, just as a bookshelf. Copy of Job, you would have a copy of Psalms, and that would usually be communal. You wouldn't expect to find one in everybody's house. Now, certain people would be able to afford some copies or maybe all of them, but the average person wouldn't.
If they sold scrolls, they may buy a Torah.
All right, we're going to pause there. Around and do the reverse. So what pattern do we see here? Right, you sell the town square, you can take that money and use it to buy a synagogue. You have to sell the synagogue, you can take that money and you can buy an Aron HaKodesh, you can buy an ark.
You can buy something more holy.
Exactly right. Right. What would we say, Yara?
You have to use the money that you use or got the proceeds
right
to buy something that is connected to Torah or
not just connected, but it can be the same or superior, right? And that's what we're going to see in the inverse here.
See, it doesn't say that it can be the same. Like if you sold one synagogue, you could buy another synagogue. It doesn't say that in the part we just read.
Not yet. No, I know. I'm sometimes when explaining the Mishnah, you have to know where it ends to be able to understand where it begins. And the alternative is to read the whole thing and then unpack the whole thing. So I'm giving a little bit of the spoiler because we're going to see in part 2 the inverse, and then we're going to get a sort of general feeling for what's going on here. Part 2.
So part 2. But if they sold a Torah, they may not buy with the proceeds scrolls of the Tanakh. Scrolls, they may not buy covers. If they sold covers, they may not buy an ark. If they sold an ark, they may not buy a synagogue. If they sold a synagogue, they may not buy a town square.
Okay, so when you are selling your synagogue, you don't get to now build up a nice marketplace, right? If you sell your Torah, you don't get to buy copies of the Tanakh. The Torah money that has been taken from that object, that the value that has been taken from that object as you transferred it to another person, still has the sanctity of the object from which it was taken. And that means it needs to stay at that level or increase from that level. It cannot be reduced. Generally, makes sense? And then part 3 just gives us a little adding to that.
Part 3, the same applies to any money left over.
All right, so let me give you a practical example of this. About 8 years ago, because it was just before I arrived, Temple Israel had a big fundraising campaign for the mitzvah of writing and preparing a Sefer Torah. Right, exactly. It was the Gould Torah. that program raised more money than was necessary to restore that one Torah, right? So our Torah fund, the Torah dedicated fund in our bank account still has money left over in it. And we cannot use that to fix a hole in the roof. Right? We couldn't even use it to buy school books for the kids. That's not the same as a Sefer Torah, which is what the money was donated for. So we can use it to repair other Torahs. Or if we wanted, we could use it to buy another Torah. Couldn't use it for a lesser object. Now, I would have to go back and double check, because this is before I got here. When people made the donations, there may have been caveats that not all the money will be used for the Torah, but might be used for other Torah-related objects, like yads or rimonim or covers. I'd have to double check that. But if people gave specifically and exclusively for the writing of a Sefer Torah or the repair of a Sefer Torah, not be used for something lesser.
I think probably they do, because usually when you donate money for a project like this, you buy like a line,
a passage and such, yes. Yeah. But oftentimes, very importantly, fundraisers would write in the flyers, but not exactly small print, right? To restore and beautify our Torahs, right? Or to repair and restore and celebrate our Torahs. They would add usually another verb or noun somewhere in there that it's still focused on the Torah, and we still wouldn't use it to fix the roof, but possibly using it for other purposes would be acceptable, other Torah-centric purposes. That's important, because the idea is that sanctity does attach, and even though the object may transfer, the value still has the sanctity that was there. So it does have practical implications, even if we're not buying and selling Torahs on the open market. Make sense-ish? Okay. Part 4.
Not sell something belonging to a community because this lowers its sanctity. The words of Rabbi Meir.
All right, so let's make sure we understand what Rabbi Meir is trying to say here. Rabbi Meir is trying to say something which might be a little controversial. He is saying that if you have how do I always make something complicated? Right? If you have a Torah, and the Torah belongs to the community, that Torah cannot be sold to Frank. That's Rabbi Meir. Now, Rabbi Meir is going to lose the argument, right? Sorry, spoiler. But, well, right. So what he is trying to say is that, let's say we have a synagogue, right? Can we sell the synagogue to Frank? Let's say that we have an old set of rimonim. Can we sell the rimonim to Frank? Or a Torah scroll. Can we sell the Torah to Frank if it currently belongs to the community? Right? If it's between Frank and Shlomo, there's no problem. But between Temple Israel and Frank, that's what Rabbi Meir is saying there's a problem. Principles that we've had in the previous part of this Mishnah, what is his issue?
His issue is that because of the fact of it belonging to a community makes it more sacred.
Exactly right. Right. So what Rabbi Meir is saying is that there is a presumption, that there is an increase in the honor, the kavod, or the holiness of something, because it is the focus of the community. And that gets lost when you transfer to another person. Because that one person, as much as they may cherish the Torah, cannot sanctify the Torah as a community. Now that may sound a little crazy to us. So, who cares if you've got 100 people or if you have, one person? But the basic principle is somewhat grounded. For example, saying the Baruch Hu, saying Kaddish, saying Kedusha. There are prayers that we only do the Rabbim when we have a community, when we have a minyan. That's because we do believe that there is opportunity for greater sanctity in a community than as an individual. That's one of the reasons why we work to try and pray as a community rather than just praying at home, even when it's inconvenient. So Rabbi Meir has a point about this idea that community versus individual, let's be honest, the Torah in the community, in the individual is not so, it's not going to have the same status. One more example just to see how we feel about this. if the museums of the world decided to sell all of their public collections to private individuals, how many of us would feel that was a better use of the paintings? The paintings were now in better care, in better places, in better position, that they were appreciated more, that this was a better cultural moment. Yeah, now most of us like the idea that it's great masterpieces and art and many other artifacts as well are publicly viewable. It may be owned by public institutions, or at least owned by museums that invite people in to be able to see them, so that the hundreds of thousands of people who walk past the Mona Lisa gives it a status and gives it almost a sanctity. Not that a painting would ever be truly sacred, at least not in the eyes of Judaism. That would be lost if it was hanging in one person's home, even if that person cherished it more than any one of the 100,000 who walked past that Mona Lisa at any given time. I have a sort of feeling that goes along with Rabbi Meir. Or wrench in this. Please.
They said to him, if so, it should not be allowed to sell from a larger town to a smaller one.
Right? Logic. Right? If this is community A, and community A has 1,000 people in it, not Frank, but community B, and community B has 500 people in it, then if the number of people who are appreciating using the object gives it the status, then community A should never be able to sell something to community B, because then there are fewer people, right? If the number is what really matters, then a synagogue of 500 cannot sell an object to a synagogue of 200, and a synagogue of 200 can't sell an object to a synagogue of 50. It would be impossible, because you would be degrading the status of the items as they move from larger to smaller communities. And as they are saying it, you can probably note that they are pointing out that that doesn't make sense, right? That in fact, from community A to community B, is a mitzvah. When a larger community is able to help a smaller community by making it available that they can purchase ritual items and things like Torahs, that's usually a very good thing, rather than a degradation of the Torah. So Rebbe Meir loses the argument. But even though he lost, it's still very worthy of us to consider what his position was and apply in other places, but not in this particular situation.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is this rules apply to a Torah that was declared non-kosher because it was ripped off?
Right, pasul, right.
Pasul, yeah.
Right. So
it needs repair or something. Is this applied to that too? Or?
So a Torah that is not kosher to read from in the synagogue for the public reading is still considered to be sacred, right? And we know that by a very simple test, which is if you have a Torah that is kosher and you have a Torah that is not kosher for reading in public, which one of them do you take in the bathroom with you? Neither of them. Right? Which one of them do you throw in the trash can?
No.
Neither of them. Right? So even a Torah that is no longer fit for use, like sphere, is still considered sacred. And so the general rule, you can't just sell your old Torahs sports car. It doesn't work like that.
Okay. Next one.
Yes.
You have a Torah that is pasul.
Right. Now you can sell it for less. So if a kosher Torah is 40,000, you can sell it for 10,000. That's okay.
Can a sofer get this Torah, buy it from the synagogue, fix it, and then sell it to somebody else?
Yes.
Okay.
I can sleep.
You help the sofer.
I bought the Torah like that.
Right.
It was ripped off. One page was ripped off, so it was considered pasul.
Of course.
The sofer bought it from the synagogue.
Right.
I don't know how much. I bought it from him after he fixed it.
Right.
So I'm fine.
That's fine. That's fine. Yes. Now, if he sold it to you because he thought you were going to decorate your walkway with it, that would be a problem, right? It still has to go into being a Torah and be used, not an art piece. He knew that you wanted to have a Torah, not an art exhibit, right? So that's fine.
Yeah.
Right. So yes, in that case, that's still perfectly fine. Right. And the labor of the sofer justifies the resale at a higher price than what he paid for it when he bought it from the synagogue. Assuming he didn't, rip off the synagogue. I mean, but God forbid.
Yeah. I don't think so. This is a very reputable.
Exactly, as I would expect, right? I mean, I don't think you often will find, disreputable sofrim, that are, hey, buddy, you want to buy a Torah?
Fell off the truck.
Yeah, exactly. Those little things in New York, on the corners. They have Rolexes, they have Versace, they have Torahs.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little big for the coat, but. All right, chapter 3, Mishnah 2. Still in the buying and selling terms.
Mishnah 2. They may not sell a synagogue except with the stipulation that it may be bought back whenever they want. The words of Rabbi Meir.
All right, so Rabbi Meir says, when you sell a synagogue, which sometimes might be necessary or even desirable, you should never relinquish permanently the right to make it a synagogue again. And we do not want to admit that this place can become less sanctified than it has been, which if you're selling a synagogue, it will be, unless it's being used as another synagogue. It's probably going to be used for something else. And that could be a problem. Speaking as the rabbi of a congregation who, before my time, has sold 3 buildings. Because wasn't there one on Cathcart, and then Eli, and then Markham Woods Road, right? So there's been three addresses that the Temple Israel has sold. 4 addresses. We're not selling the 4th. We're comfortable here. So this could be a problem, because I'm sure that the people who bought the synagogues from the congregation from Temple Israel would not have bought it if there had been a line in the contract that said, oh, by the way, we can buy it back whenever we want.
Yeah.
Most people do not want to have that as an opening. So don't worry, Rabbi Meir loses.
But the sages say they may sell it in perpetuity except for 4 purposes for it to become one of 4 things: a tannery, a ritual bath, or a urinal.
All right. So these places are not appropriate for the synagogue to become. Right? If you're going to sell a synagogue, you can sell it to someone who's going to turn it into a granary. I mean, I'd like to imagine the idea, but it could happen. We can sell the synagogue to someone who's going to turn it into condominiums.
What about a museum?
Or a museum, right? That's also conceivable. But a tannery, right? That's where you make leather. I don't know if you've ever been near a tannery or leather factories. The chemicals and the smells that come from it are horrible, and they were worse back in the day, because one of the main ingredients for tanning leather in the day was urine. That was one of the acidic chemicals that was used for the tanning process. Not a lovely place, and there are regulations not only in Jewish law but throughout the world of how far the tannery has to be outside the town, because people did not want that anywhere near where people had to live. The bathhouse and even the ritual bath, again, these are places where people are
Indecent, let's say.
Yes, let's say indecent. They are exposing themselves. And then, of course, the urinal, which actually in the Hebrew is a place of water. Again, this is not where your synagogue should become. So as long as that's not what it's going to become, yes, you can sell the synagogue and it's okay.
So it's important for the leadership to always ask,
Yes. Yes. So what are your plans for our building? They say, oh, we're going to build a giant public bathroom. Okay. Now we've got a problem.
What about, say, church or mosque? Can you sell it to something like that?
More complicated. Again, it goes back to our discussions in Avodah Zarah. You can definitely not sell it to an idol worshiper, right? So someone who says, this is going to be a great temple for Zeus. Sorry, we definitely cannot sell you the synagogue. But because Christianity and Islam, even more so, are generally considered to be monotheistic faiths. Christianity is a little bit more on the fuzzy side. Again, we've had a long conversation during Avodah Zarah about that, so I don't want to rehash. But most authorities consider it to be this side of polytheism, and therefore in monotheistic camp, even if there are elements to it that we disagree with in terms of how they express their monotheism with the idea of the Trinity. usually that is considered acceptable. All right, part 3.
Part 3. Rabbi Judah says they may sell it to be a courtyard, and the purchaser may do what he likes with it.
Right, so he's basically saying that you can sell it and do what you like with it, and carte blanche. Now, his expression of carte blanche is actually going to be countered by his attitude in the next Mishnah. So let's go ahead and turn the page, because the topic is not done yet.
Okay, Mishnah 3 said further, a synagogue that has fallen into ruins, they may not eulogize in it, nor twist ropes, nor to spread nets to trap animals, nor to lay out produce on its roof to dry, nor to use it as a shortcut, as it says, and I will desolate your holy places in Leviticus. Their holiness remains even when they are desolate.
Right, so in his mind, you can sell it for whatever you like, and they can do whatever they like to it, but the sanctity of the synagogue doesn't change. Right, it can be in ruins, it can be turned into these things, but it's still a sacred place, which is why even if it's been desolate and destroyed, which if you've ever visited, for example, Israel, you will see many synagogues from the last 2,000 years all over the place. Many of them are in ruins. A few have been restored to use, but most of them are in ruins. To treat that space as though it was just a regular secular space, right? It still has sanctity. And so that means that you have to treat it in a different way. You can't set traps in it, doing your laundry in the ruins. For us, yes, we tend to venerate ruins a little bit more than our ancestors did, or the ancestors of humanity has. We have the luxury of venerating ruins more, but for them, ruins were often a very important resource for stone, for cut stone, which was always very important, or as a place to do other work because it was already pre-built. But the synagogue, no, that was not allowed. One of the interesting things I noticed when I was there, very first time in Israel, and I was just 20 years old. If you've all been to Caesarea or near Caesarea in Israel along the coast, there is the ruins of the hippodrome, which was the racetrack for the chariots, which a lot of people miss because you can't really see it. It's just a grassy berm in a giant oval shape. It's easier to see in Google Earth if you look at the satellite picture, because there wasn't huge stands. It wasn't like the Colosseum. But what you can still see are the giant granite markers to run around, the markers of the infield, if you like. And when you go up to them, and again, this was 25 years ago. I'm old. If you go up to them, you'll see that, because they were like waist-high grass when I went, you'll see grooves cut into them. And the guide explains that is from where people throughout the ages have tried to cut the granite to get the millstones. Because these were round, these were conical pieces, and people were trying to cut a slice because good polished millstones were really, really expensive. But they only made it like a quarter of the way in before they gave up and realized that
really hard.
That granite may make a great millstone, but hard. And the Romans may have been able to make this because they had so much wealth that they could get an army of people to come together and polish and cut and polish the granite. But your average farmer just looking for a free millstone, tink, 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 where they gave up as they tried to cut the millstones. It just doesn't work. So yes, ruins were, those millstones notwithstanding, an important resource for many places. But synagogues should not be treated that way.
What happens if the community have a synagogue in a storefront?
Mm-hmm.
Is that storefront becomes also?
So the general
right.
Right. So the general feeling is, especially with a rental, that although it was used that way, the same way that your house could be used that way, that because it wasn't consecrated exclusively for that purpose, and certainly wasn't your property, that it doesn't retain that particular status. So it's not an issue. Part two is really going to be very poignant and we'll talk about that for a bit. You wouldn't mind, Judy?
Part 2. If grass comes up in it, it should not be plucked. Melancholy.
Okay, so you imagine, you have your synagogue, and it's, in ruins. And what happens? Well, like I said about Caesarea, the grass starts growing in it.
That's why they don't do that at the hotel, because I always wondered why the bushes
Mhm.
that are, I was like, oh, I understand why. Okay.
Capers, by the way.
Uh-huh.
That's what those bushes are. They're the caper tree. Or caper, I think it is.
Somebody came here to give a lecture about
Yes,
that.
we had a great thing, and I learned that from her as well, exactly. But those actually may be considered more beautification than anything, but because and those are not the walls of a synagogue; those are the retaining walls of the platform of the synagogue, or where the temple stood. But the grass that grows up in the ruins of a synagogue shouldn't be plucked, because we should see it and be reminded of the desolation. Good. Then our sympathy is not moved, right? Our emotions remain too good.
I think there is an Haftarah that talks about it. He describes the temple.
Yes.
That foxes are
Right.
roaming in it.
Exactly, and that's actually the very end of Masechet Makot in the Talmud. Akiva quotes that verse because when he sees them, he starts laughing, and his colleagues say, "Why are you laughing? We're here at the temple, and the foxes are running among the ruins. This is not time for levity." And he says, "Yes, but until I saw this prophecy come true, I wasn't 100% sure that the prophecy of redemption would come true. But now that I know that the desolation is true and truly as prophesied, I know that the redemption is true and will be as prophesied." It took a long time, still on our road, but was there. But Rabbi Yehuda is worried that if the ruins look too clean, we will not really be upset. And this is a problem not so much for ruins of synagogues nowadays, because nowadays we have turned them more into museums of the ones that are 2,000 years old. But I do see this issue come up sometimes with mourning, with grief in general for loved ones, where people will try to almost sanitize the ceremony to such an extent that it's not too sad. So many people resist doing kriya, the tearing of our garments. Many people have asked me, do we have to put the earth on the aron, on the coffin? It's just so hard. It's so sad. It's like, yes, that we are not supposed to remove the elements of grief that are grief. We are supposed to let ourselves be sad and not trim the weeds so that it looks pretty and nice. Now, in antiquity, really all the way almost up into the modern world, more people were familiar with grief because it was a constant companion. But nowadays, death is usually done away from the home, although hospice is beginning to change that. And more people are passing in their homes. And on the whole, I think that is a positive development. Certainly, it gives people often more choice and more freedom in their final days. And we have ways of managing their discomfort that are much better than in the ancient world. But also funerals were a much more hands-on experience. You didn't have the body whisked away by a funeral home to disappear, to be seen only, as in the casket already, or perhaps not even then, just with the casket closed, and then lowered into the ground, and then walk away before anything happens that looks like a burial. Everybody, they would prepare the body themselves, prepare it at home. They would carry it from their home to the grave. They would dig the grave. They would lay them in the grave. They would fill the grave. There was a realness to the death that you couldn't deny, which allowed grief to truly come out, rather than needing closure, and to use the modern terminology. You had closure because you were closing. You were doing it. And I think we have diminished the accessibility of grief. And Rabbi Yehuda is talking about that issue.
When we go through that experience, it is a very, very difficult, but afterwards it seems to have a much higher healing.
Yes.
So that's what makes it so interesting in Judaism. How you go through that time period of grieving and the circumstances and how everything comes about.
It is cathartic.
Afterwards, it's much better.
Yes. I remember reading, and I've only read one article, so you have to check the facts, but it was a very interesting study where they did chemical analyses of tears. And they found that tears from grief or from sadness were different than tears from pain, right? If I hit your foot with a hammer and you cry, and if I break your heart and you cry, and in fact, with the tears of grief, there were chemicals related to stress that were being essentially flushed from the body.
Wow.
As opposed to pain, where it was simply a "ow, I'm hurt" kind of experience. And the idea that our tears help heal us by taking those chemicals that are associated with our grief and pain and stress and helping to remove the excess from our body, and then we feel better after a good cry, I think is one of the reasons why we in Judaism don't do the Stoic thing. We don't try to avoid our tears. If anything, we do things that this is a sad moment. Go ahead, let yourself be sad. Don't pretend that it's not sad. Even if, as in many cases, especially with modern medicine, death often comes as a final release because a person is able to prolong their passing for so long. Even still, the loss of a person should always elicit that grief from us, and we shouldn't be upset that the weeds are growing. That's okay.
The Shiva is that's the purpose of the Shiva, to help.
Yeah. To help you be sad.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. You know, the
lessening.
exactly. Right. Because if you actually feel sad, eventually you won't. Whereas if you avoid feeling sad, you're that ache is when people ask me, when we talk about Shiva and such, not usually at the time of the passing, but at other study points, I say, look, you're going to grieve today, or you're going to grieve some point in the future. You're either going to grieve as Judaism has structured in order to have it happen in a natural and helpful way with your community around you, with your family together, or you're going to be on a therapist's couch. Why not do it this way? Right? Why not allow Judaism to carry you through this time and do what it can to support you? Because it can't do everything, of course, because grief is always going to happen, and it's not going to be all better instantly. But it will begin the process, as opposed to burying it and hiding from it and picking the weeds so it looks like it's pristine. And then eventually it's just going to spring up and overwhelm you. All right. With that topic, let's change to a completely different topic. But one that's a little bit closer to... But the topic's a little bit closer back to Purim, at least a little bit. And so we're on chapter 3, Mishnah 4. And we're going to be talking about some special Torah readings. So we're going to begin where it says Mishnah 4, number 1, if Rosh Chodesh.
If Rosh Chodesh Adar falls on Shabbat, the portion of Shekalim is read on that day.
All right. What is Shekalim? Look up in the introductory notes, because this is going to be your little crib sheet for this Mishnah. So there's a 1, 2, 3, 4 in the end of the introductory notes. Is the Torah portion, the maftir that we read, that reminds us that on Adar that they would have brought a half shekel to the temple. The communal flat tax, daily sacrifices throughout the year. And this is one of the few places where everybody paid the same. That way the daily sacrifices would come equally from everybody, and the Torah is very explicit. The rich don't give more for this, the poor don't give less. The half shekel is everyone even. For other things, tithing or free will donations, yes, that would vary according to your means. This, everybody was equal for the daily sacrifice. It would be read for Adar. Here the question is, if Rosh Chodesh is on Shabbat, what do we read? We read Shekalim. We read that portion.
Because ordinarily on Rosh Chodesh, on Shabbat, you would read the Rosh Chodesh maftir.
Exactly right. Which is also explained elsewhere in the Mishnah, but yes. Because remember, as I always say, the Mishnah assumes you know everything else except for this one Mishnah. It's kind of an interesting way of looking at things. All right. Onward.
Part A, if it falls in the middle of the week, it is read on the Shabbat before, and on the next Shabbat, there is a break.
Right, so that's Rosh Chodesh. Right, if the Rosh Chodesh falls in the middle of the week, then we do it early rather than late. We read the Shekalim before Rosh Chodesh as a so that people have at least 2 full weeks before Purim to know that Shekalim, to be reminded of Shekalim. Right, exactly. Makes sense? Okay. Part 2.
Part 2.
Now, as long, and again, this is another example of, as long as we're talking about special Torah portions.
On the second of the special Shabbatot, they read Zachor.
Right, so this is the section from Deuteronomy, as you can see again up in the top there, it's 25:17 to 19. Because Purim is considered to be connected to the Amalekites, because Haman is Agagite, right? He is said to be from an Agagite, which I always love saying, an Agagite. And since Agag is the last named king of the Amalekites, there is seen as a connection there. Make sense?
Yes.
Good. And it's also a good reminder, a Zachor, if you will. It's a good reminder that the holiday of Purim is around the corner.
Yes.
Yes.
3 months.
Part 3.
What?
Next part.
3 months.
Oh, for us?
Yeah.
No, I'm talking about in the Torah, in the Maftir section.
Purim is about the 1st of March this coming year.
Yes. Yeah, it's I think it's the Erev is the last day of February, and the daytime is the 1st of March. Yeah. And then Pesach. It's really one of the unusual years where we have Purim and Pesach in the same month. Beginning of March, end of March.
Okay, on the third special Shabbatot, the portion of the red heifer.
Right, and again, this is Parah, part number 3. This is Numbers 19, and it's talking about the red heifer, who would be burnt in order to create the ash, which would be mixed with the water that would be used to purify people who had come in contact with the dead. Cannot do at the moment. And that was important because you were leading towards Pesach. And people needed to be in ritual purity to be able to eat from the actual Passover offering. Our modern Passover Seders, not the same requirement, but in the ancient world where you were eating from a sacrifice that had been done at the temple, you had to be ritually pure. So a reminder of one of the main ways to ritually purify people, and one of the main ways that people became ritually impure, was rather important. Special section as a public service announcement. And then part,
And on the 4th, this month shall be for you.
Right, and this is HaChodesh, Exodus 12. And again, this is the reminder of Passover itself. The holiday is now right around the corner. Yes, Exodus 12. It is. This will be the month for you.
Yeah, I was just trying to think back. What was this?
What's actually in that?
Yeah, what's actually in that, because
Right.
I have read it. If the regular order is resumed,
Right, we just go back to normal. We actually have a regular Torah reading all the way through.
and part 6, they interrupt the regular order for anything. For Rosh Chodesh, for Hanukkah, for Purim, for fasts, for Ma'amadot, and for Yom HaKippurim.
Right, so all of these different things can have a reason to interrupt the regular order. What this means is, if the holiday falls on Shabbat, then whatever the regular parasha is will come the following week. So if it was supposed to be, trying to keep a good example, let's just make something up, right? If it was supposed to be Vayechi, but it is now, by some weird fluke of the calendar, Purim, on that Shabbat, then we would put Vayechi on the week after. Make sense? Right, that the holidays that are listed here trump the regular Torah readings, and we just pick it up later. And our calendar accommodates this. And that's why we read, you have to look it up. It's not just the same, keep going in order each week.
I'm glad you keep track of that, Rabbi, because I don't think it would be.
Well, I don't personally keep track of it. Thankfully,
remind us.
yes, thankfully there is a whole calendar system that does. Keepcal.com. Can't recommend it enough. It's a very streamlined website, has all the basic information you need and nothing extravagant. Look it up instantly. But this is one place where things can get confusing between us and Medinat Yisrael, the land of Israel, because we have 2 days of holidays. They have 1 day of holidays. If one of our days overlaps Shabbat and theirs don't, then they can read next week's while we're still reading the holiday one. And then we have to adjust, and eventually we catch up to them. Yeah, it happens quite often. Anytime you get a holiday that actually hits Shabbat, it's pretty much going to throw things off in Israel. And then we have to catch up, and that happens because sometimes there are double parshiot where we read 2 Torah portions in 1 week, and what will happen is we'll read 2 and they'll read 1, and that will give us a chance to catch up. I think so.
Because I remember my sister was telling me, we read the parsha of next week, and I said, no.
Well, they did and we didn't.
She's in Israel.
Exactly. All right, so as long as we're talking about Torah readings, let's talk about other Torah readings. So, chapter 3, Mishnah 5. And we're just going to go through these quite quickly because the citations are here. Go ahead and look it up. But notice that these were choices. These are not, it's not written in the Torah that you should read these sections on these days. Instead, this is the sages saying, when we read Torah on these days, these are the best sections for us to read. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay, onward.
On Pesach, we read from the portion of the festivals in Leviticus.
Good. Part 2.
On Shavuot, 7 weeks.
And again, the citations are right there, Deuteronomy 16.
On Rosh Hashanah, on the 7th day of the first month.
And that's Leviticus 23.
On Yom HaKippurim, after the death.
Which is Acharei Mot, more famously known, right? Acharei Mot is the section which is picking up after the death of Aaron's sons. But really, that's an introductory phrase to the Yom Kippur service in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle.
On the first day of the festival of Sukkot, portion of the festivals in Leviticus.
Which we already mentioned in number 1.
And on the other days of the festival of Sukkot, the sections on the offerings of the festival.
Right, which is, we just go through what was the offering of that day. Which is one of the reasons which makes the Torah reading for Sukkot quite easy. Because once you get the basic pattern down, it's just insert the right numbers for the offerings for that day. Good? Good. I knew you'd love it. Let's keep going on the same theme. Chapter 3, Mishnah 6.
This is something we actually still follow.
And you know, the idea that we are still reading the same Torah sections on the same holidays as they did for the last 2,000 plus years is kind of remarkable.
Yeah.
That this is still what we do. It may not be something that's guiding our own personal choices because, you know, I don't have to sit around and figure out what am I going to read on Pesach this year. But the continuity here is very powerful. All right, chapter 3, Mishnah 6.
On Hanukkah, they read the section of the princes.
Which was the donations that the princes brought. There were more princes than there are days of Hanukkah, so some of them do not get to be read. But we do go through the list as connected.
And Purim and Amalek came.
For the reasons stated before of the connection between Haman and Amalek.
On Rosh Chodesh and on the first of your months.
Right, which makes sense because that's about Rosh Chodesh.
The sacrifice that's brought on Rosh Chodesh.
Exactly right, from Parshat Pinchas.
On Ma'amadot, the account of the creation.
This is one we don't do anymore, right? So Ma'amadot were local Kohanic Kohen festivals, and we don't do these anymore. There's more about them in Masechet Ta'anit, which is prior to this one, so the Mishnah kind of thinks you've already read that, but we don't need to go into great detail. But they would read Genesis, they would read creation at that point.
Only the Kohens or everybody?
No, I mean, that was a community service, so it'd be read for the congregation.
Okay. On fast days, the blessings and curses.
Which is not so much fun. And there used to be more fast days, and people used to be able to call communal fast days if they felt there was a need. So yeah, not just, you know, personal. So that would also have been done more often. We don't call so many communal fast days these nowadays. Then part A, there's this little subnote.
They do not interrupt while reading the curses, but rather one reads them all.
Right, so usually you can divide most sections of the Torah into multiple aliyot. In this particular case, for the curses, no, you do not get to have more than one aliyah. The curses begin, and you keep reading a rather long section. That can be very difficult. One tradition that is used in some communities is, although you only have one aliyah, you can have additional readers read the sections without a new blessing being read or said in between. Yes. Part 6.
Yeah. On Monday and Thursday, and on Shabbat at Mincha, they read according to the regular order, and this does not count as part of the reading for the succeeding Shabbat.
Right, so these are the regular Torah readings that we do. The question here is, do those count as part of the aliyot that we need to do for the community on Shabbat? Just because you read in the afternoon on the previous Shabbat, and on Monday and on Thursday, that doesn't mean come Shabbat that your job is done. On Shabbat, you have to go ahead and read the Torah portion as regular.
Okay.
And then part 7.
As it says, and Moshe declared to the children of Israel the appointed seasons of the Lord. In Leviticus 23. It is their mitzvah that each should be read in its appropriate time.
Right, so one of the ways that we keep the mitzvot of the holidays is to read from the Torah at the appropriate part in the Torah for the holiday. And this is especially important in the modern world because, well, by modern world, I mean the last 2,000 years. Without the temple and without the sacrifices that went along with the holidays, in ways that we marked and celebrated the holidays has been taken from us. But thankfully, the record of the Torah gives us a permanent, right? Something they can never take away from us, way to remember the holidays and to commemorate them. And so celebrating the holidays means including the special Torah reading for the holiday, which is why everyone should come to services on the holiday. Good? All right. We're going to go ahead and leave it there for tonight. There's more about the Megillah coming up. So we're actually getting back to the main topic of the Masechet, but not tonight.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Oh, thank you for coming.
Thank you, Rabbi.